In this video, we'll see a quick introduction to arrays in Java.
So here we have a pretty simple example of a Java program that has some variables. Now what you'll notice is that we're clearly trying to keep track of something here, and in this case we're saying that it's golf scores over 4 rounds. So we have 4 variables: round 1, round 2, round 3, and round 4. And then we print those, and we can run this to see what it does. There we go, we print our rounds. So in the output, I'll put a note that we're actually saving this in 4 variables. And we'll run this to make sure, yeah, so there we go. Okay, so that's one way we can store 4 variables. And I'll put a blank line at the end, because now let's see some other ways we can possibly store this. Having some need of storing multiple values that are the same thing, in this case, a round of golf score, is common enough in programming that we have something that lets us do that in a more succinct way. So here we have 4 separate variables. In Java, there's a special kind of object called an array that lets us keep any number of variables together in one entity. So to declare an array, we give a type of the values we want to store in the array. In this case, we want an integer array. And then we put brackets indicating that this is an array type, not just an integer, this is an array. And we'll say scores. And to instantiate it, the object will say new int, and then we give it the size. So this is saying that we want 4 integers in our array. So the first variable in this array, the first element, the first cell, is numbered 0, and we access it by putting a 0 in brackets after the name of the array. And we can define these as the same values that we saw before. Notice each time as I add a new score, I'm updating the index I use by 1. So you'll notice here I have round 1, round 2, round 3, round 4. Here I have scores 0, scores 1, scores 2, scores 3. So one difference is that in array, I don't have a choice. That first cell is going to be index 0. So there's a couple different ways to handle that. One way you'll sometimes see is that if you want to hold 4 values, someone will declare an array of 5 cells and then store the actual values in the last 4 elements and then leave that first element empty. And then the round and the cell in the array for that score will be the same. That's not completely necessary, and I'll show you how you can avoid that. So now I have an array of golf scores. I have 4 cells here, and if I want to print them, so we'll print them in rounds. So we'll say round 0, and then we'll go until the rounds are less than, and there's a special value in our array, scores.length, and that gives us how many cells we have in the array, and then we'll increment round. And it looks like I made this plural, so I'll take the S off. And here, I'll print, and I want to indicate what the round is. So I'll say plus round. So there's my print statement. And then to print the actual score, I'll say scores 0. So when I run this, you can see I have a couple of issues. The first is that I put 0 here, and I obviously don't want to print 0 4 times. I want to print the round. And then the other issue that you may see, we say round 0, round 1, round 2, round 3. Well, those are the indices in the array. But if you were actually writing, say, an app to keep track of your golf scores, you're not always going to have a round 0. I mean, maybe that's your practice round or something, but if it was a 4-round tournament, let's say, you would have round 1, round 2, round 3, round 4. So this is actually a display problem, and we can get around that by adding 1 to the index as we're printing these out. And I know that whatever this index is, the actual round it represents is 1 more, and so I'll add it to the round when I display. So if I run this now, you can see we display the correct rounds, and this lines up exactly with our original output. Now, one objection that I think is reasonable here is we have a bunch of lines of code here, and we have kind of a bunch of lines of code here. Really, we're only saving, let's say, 3 total lines of code when all is said and done, especially because I need to print my empty line at the end, and then I need to say score is saved in an array. So one objection maybe here is this and this look a lot alike. They're almost identical. In fact, to actually get the array with the values, it takes more typing with the array the way we did this than otherwise. However, we can initialize an array like this. So here's our array. We have an integer array of scores, and we'll call this one scores2. And then I can initialize it with an array of integers. And so now I'm actually going to copy these 5 lines of code. And instead of everywhere I see scores, I'll say scores2, except it's scores2. And now when I run this, again, I get the same output. Oops, I need to say, I've initialized this array. And so you can see I'm doing this much more succinctly than I was before. The point I'm trying to get through with this particular example is the point of an array is it avoids a scenario where we have to create variables with numbers when we have a bunch of values that represent a similar or the same thing. And this comes up a lot in programming. Anytime you're writing code and you find yourself naming variables, value 1, value 2, value 3, score 1, score 2, score 3, test 1, test 2, test 3, whatever. Anytime you're naming something the same thing and you're differentiating by numbers, almost always that's an indication that an array is actually what it is that you want to use. If we initialize the array with our values, this becomes much more succinct code. So that's the advantage of using an array.